I'm not going to do what Jesse asked me to do either, and talk about opportunities and possibilities. I thought maybe just to share what we do and some of the challenges we're having, and then you can tell me how we can do better. So I'm working with a US-funded initiative called Powered by the People. This is my first time working with US government funding. So all these challenges are also new to me, and it somehow explains the gray hairs that are coming very quickly this year. But before I go into the challenges, maybe just to talk a little bit about Powered by the People. This is an initiative to provide direct and accessible support to activists and other allied actors in collective action. And this is a big project in every kind of way. It's a global consortium of 30 grant makers, movement support organizations, knowledge partners, and together their work covers Asia, Africa, MENA, Latin America, the Caribbean, Europe, Eurasia, so almost full global coverage. And it's also the largest grant that the USAID Bureau for Democracy, Rights, and Governance has ever made. It's $45 million over 5 years. Yeah, it's big. And you know, if Trump isn't elected and it doesn't take away the money, the intention, which could happen with government funding, but the intention is, and the commitment is to make sure that at least half of those funds are moved directly into the hands of activists and movements working in global majority countries. So while there is a lot of kind of strategy support and services aimed at movements, a lot of our time and resources is around grant making. And the way that the grant making works at Powered by the People is through regional grant makers. So we have organizations who have existing infrastructure and relationships in each of those regions, and they provide funding and accompaniment to movements at all different phases of their life cycle. So it could be for strategy, it could be for crisis response, it could be for resiliency, it could be for well-being and security services. And we, as P by P, the collective, don't have a grant-making strategy per se. The idea is that you invest in the individual grant-making strategies of each of these regional grant makers, and who are kind of have the proximity and understand best what those needs and priorities of the groups they're working with. But we can also already see that in each region, there are kind of emerging trends. So in Asia, it's transnational repression. So if you're working in Cambodia and you seek safe haven in Thailand, the Cambodian government uses their government ties in Thailand to find you and to persecute you for your work. In Latin America, it's mostly around indigenous rights and environmental justice. In Europe and Eurasia, it's around the kind of rise of authoritarianism and how do you counter that. And here in Africa, which is of course lots of different contexts and countries, but we see a lot of the grants are for human rights defenders and activists who are persecuted because of their work, and it's tied to these kind of civic space restrictions. Anyway, by centering the regional grant makers and really drawing on their kind of trust-based local knowledge networks, they're able to move very quickly. So the emergency grants that they've provided, a lot of them have happened in less than 24 hours, which is kind of unheard of with US government funding. And in the past year, we have made a total of 150 grants to activists and movements in more than 50 countries. And beyond, obviously, the funds that are providing, the idea is that we model and evidence and share best practice so that then there's more and more relevant resources for activists and movements. The reality is that year one, or 1 year in, rather than modeling best practice, we have lots of interesting challenges that we can share with you. It is US government funding, so it is bureaucratic. We've applied for all kinds of waivers. You know, we don't have to do marketing and branding. We don't have to share the names of individuals and orgs. We have tactics to use, second tiers to get to those at risk, but it's still there, right? Like the compliance requirements are still there. I mean, I'm writing a waiver right now so that we waive the rule that you can't have entertainment costs covered on the grants, because we want to be able to provide an activist who's living in exile with a birthday cake on their birthday, and that should be allowable because it's an important part of well-being. So these are the realities of working with US government. A more serious one is obviously around the safety and security. A program this big and with this many partners and the kind of information and knowledge that's being communicated and shared puts frontline activists whose lives are on the line at additional risk. So we're constantly having to reassess and improve safety and security protocols. And that keeps me up at night. The political and economic interest, a lot of the activists and movements that are being supported through the 30+ consortium partners, they can't receive US government funding because it will delegitimize their credibility as a movement. Sometimes when activists and movements do want the US government funding, we can't do it because of US government economic and political interest that don't allow us to support certain things. And then I would say the big one is around this idea of values alignment, right? As a project, we want to be addressing issues of decolonization and promoting local leadership. Doing that within the framework of a US government-funded project, you can understand. The idea of promoting movement mindsets in the way that we're working. When you still have, strict grants, deliverables, and timelines that don't actually allow you to adapt in ways that best suit the movements and the activists that you're working with. And yeah, the safety and security. Again, the most kind of important piece of all of this, when sometimes just by having your name associated with a project funding by US funding can already increase your danger. That's another big tension that we're figuring out.